There's a lot of new work that you and your team have said, hey, we hope this is helpful. And you've come with deep passion and conviction, and it's so helpful. My wife and I can say immediately, thank you, because you've helped us step in with purpose with our family team. So I just want to start with gratitude, saying thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Praise God. That's awesome, man.
For sure, for sure. Secondly, I wanted to say congratulations, because I believe we're within the month, 2 months. How old is your grandson?
Yeah, about 6 weeks, I think. Yeah.
Okay, congrats. Because that's part of your vision and dream is third generation of like, man, it's not about my kids. It's about my kids' kids and forward. Would you explain your heart a little bit around that idea of third generation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you study multigenerational family, the thing that anyone who's done this says is the most surprising but most consistent outcome is the destruction of the third generation. So, and this has really been documented well in any kind of family business context. The first generation makes the money, the second generation spends the money, gets corrupted, the third generation starts over, but with sort of baggage, knowing that they kind of have fallen very far from where the family had come from. And so this has actually caused a lot of people to be less interested in building multi-generational family. They're like, well, what's the point? You know, if the third generation is just going to...
The cycle's going to flop.
Yeah, there's a famous kind of old proverb that says from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, which is their way of saying that you go from, all the way back to the working class. That was kind of the idea of shirt sleeves there. But our heart is, why is that? Is that necessary? Is that that doesn't seem like that's the design of family. Right. And I've seen families that have really persisted for many generations of blessing. And so I've been trying to figure out what causes that to happen. What might create a situation in which the third generation is actually the most blessed generation instead of the most cursed generation of a multi-generational family. And I think, so one of the problems with coming up with a hypothesis, you get one shot at this, because you don't, you can look at the past, you can look at other families, but personally, you have to really decide what to do, because obviously I'm not going to be around,
There's no retakes.
Yeah, exactly. Like whatever I set up now is, with whatever wisdom I have is likely what is primarily going to be what impacts. And so my thesis is, if you, as the first generation, instead of raising your children, the second generation, to be happy, or really aiming at their happiness, if you aim at making them great parents of your grandchildren, in other words, you both work as a team, generation 1, generation 2, to bless the third generation, what will that create? Now, that's a hypothesis. Again, I get one shot at this and we'll see what happens. But my belief and my hope is that if instead of trying to dump resources on my kids with the sort of vision of this is for your comfort, this is so that you don't have to go through hard things like I did, a lot of those are the things I think that corrupt the second generation. You really actually want to have a bigger vision for the second generation. And this isn't about saying my kids aren't important and my grandkids are. It's much more of a strategy for how all 3 generations can flourish. And I think that, so when we talk to our kids, it's like, how do we construct between our 2 generations, the best possible team to really help that third generation? And then will this just cause the 4th generation to be corrupt? Well, then what I hope is that the second and third generation do the same thing.
They repeat. They think third generation.
Yeah, the second and third generation then really begin to partner to create a great 4th generation. And so because I think that one of the intuitions that shifts when you think this way is that when you're parenting your kids, I think the default in our culture is to parent your kids for their happiness. And I think that creates a terminal generation. And it's not hard to understand why that is, because if you think that the life is about, they're the center of the world, and then of course, if they think they're the center of the world, then, that's going to cause a certain kind of character development within them. But if instead you say, hey, we're both here, and you're going to see us sacrifice, and we're going to call you to sacrifice. We're going to call you to build a kind of character that make you great parents of your children, of our grandchildren. My hope, my expectation is that that's going to create the kind of culture within a family where the kids understand that there's bigger things than them. That it's okay to sacrifice to be a great mother or father for their children, that they saw us do that, and that, there are enormous benefits that we get from that. But it's pretty well known that happiness is not a good goal, but a great byproduct of a good goal. And so we have to really decide what that goal is, right? And so certainly our main goals are all kingdom oriented. Like we want to bless the kingdom of God. We want to sacrifice as a family team for God's kingdom. But relationally within us, it's really important that the culture of our home is one that is excited about the future generations, and that we're beginning to create the kind of platform for the flourishing of our family generationally, and not just for our brief lifetime here on earth.
Right. This is fascinating. I'm thinking about your little 6-week-old grandson and how the first, an idea for some practical, the first 2 years, let's say, of his life, already what you hope to see as and you're actually hoping for it not only from your kids who are his parents, but also like as a family. Yeah. This is the way you could go about those first couple years, the way you could think to raise him to be a great father one day. Can you think of any practicals around that really young phase?
Oh man. Well, I think that this is where, when you're inviting a grandchild into a culture that is very robust, in terms of there's his great grandparents are there, like his grandparents are there,
4
his
generations.
parents. Yeah, it's, to me, the most practical thing to build for your children is a multi-generational root structure. So they are grounded in their identity from day one. They know who we are. Mm-hmm. They're not just an individual. Now, they are an individual, and we want to honor all of the unique ways that God has made them. But I think that what we've been experimenting with as a culture is that is primary, and that's almost entirely where identity comes from. Is it's all individual, and so parents are actually, are really hurting their children by providing a larger identity. And I actually think that the subtle reason for that is that it allows the parents to abdicate that responsibility of passing on the family stories, of building the kind of culture. Like, if you want parents to be able to pursue their own individual goals, then they also need to say, well, I guess I'm going to give that same gift to my children. And then you create an ideology that says that's a good idea. That's never been the way that people have seen how to ground children. Children need to have identity coming from their family. Who are we? Where do we come from? And you can see this, like when kids get adopted, there's this, this weird, from our culture's perspective, drive that often they have to try to figure out who they are. That's not strange. That's strange to us, but historically, everyone needed that. We need to know who our parents are, who our grandparents are, where how did we get here? Yeah. And I think that if we don't do that, the subtle message is the world does revolve around you, that your story did just begin when you were born, and that your story will end when you die. And that's the story that we're telling people. And it doesn't provide a lot of meaning. It really creates, I think, a lot of self-centeredness and narcissism. It's just bad for the individual and for the society and the family.
And that pairs into parenting chaos, keeping chaos down, and going after discipline for chaos, or discipline for just bring it back to peace. Very short-term thinking versus training of children. Exactly. And you've gotten into it a little bit already, but could you flesh out a little further? Because this is like major forefront for me right now with my 4 girls. Is how am I training them? How am I training them? What perspective, what culture are we training within? But also, how am I seeing each of these opportunities as training these future mothers versus training these little 4-year-old. Would you help paint a picture for how we could kind of flip our perspective there?
Yeah. Well, I think that probably there's never been a time where we've needed to become clearer about what is the training that we're trying to give our children. And I think that there's different sort of layers of that identity. There's the sort of the larger family layer, like what are the values of our family and how do we instill those distinctive values into our children? And so are there things that we celebrate? This is like, do we talk about these things? Do we root these values in scripture and tell those scriptural stories? And then do we actually sometimes just tactically train about, like, if we're going to be a hospitable family, like, what do we do when people walk in the house? How do we think about, having people over for dinner? Like so those are the larger cultural, and then you can kind of get down into the more role-based training. So like if you have a house of daughters, do you want to be training them someday to be great mothers? And that is, and same with sons, do you want to be training them to be great fathers? Right. And this is where I've gotten, kind of curious about the sort of problems that we're having as a culture in trying to even define what a woman or a man is. I think that this is really stems directly from the confusion we have about family. Like I think that femininity is typified by mature motherhood, and masculinity is typified by mature fatherhood. And it doesn't mean that every woman needs to be a mother or every man needs to be a father. It means that that's what defines those gender identities. And so I would say every woman needs to champion motherhood. Every man needs to champion fatherhood. And if God hasn't called you to be a biological mother or father, then I think He's called you to replicate those identities or those values in other ways, spiritually. And there's many ways that you can do that. But I think that's sort of the true north of trying to figure out what those are, and that releases parents to be able to have the freedom to know how to train their kids. Otherwise, the alternative to that is you do have to train your kids in essentially androgynous environments. Like we can't talk about gender, we can't talk about distinctions, we can't talk about roles. Everyone's an individual. Everything that we do that's related to that is somehow going to be imposing some kind of restriction on your individual freedom, which is the absolute highest value in our culture right now. Yeah. But you have to understand that does great damage to the family and to the future of your family. So we need to have the courage to be able to train our kids. Hey, this is what it looks like to be a great mother. Like, we want our daughters to be around the greatest mothers in our community, in our area. Like, can they be learning and gleaning from them and from their mother, and same with sons and their father.
So if my parents would have put the focus on raising a great businessman as my primary role, well, great, that only goes so far. If they would have put the primary focus on training a great future father, even if I'm 41 and I'm not a dad, what harm there? The characteristics in a great father, right? Is that what you're kind of saying? Is like that is,
and likely, if, as a 41-year-old man who doesn't have children, you are a father as something.
Yeah,
I do think that's why these things are integrated and woven into the fabric of our gender. And so, Paul didn't have children. He talked about himself as a father all the time. This was the way he saw his life. He says to Corinthians, "You have 10,000 guardians, but not many fathers. I was a father to you." And so this is the way that people thought, throughout all of history. Jesus, his favorite word for himself was a son, And so I think the movement from son to father and his relationship with the father, these are not decisions that we make about like what we choose to do. This is who we are when we're born. Like, this is, and that's why I think it is rooted so deeply into our gender, into our sex. Like, the biological instincts that women and men have that differ because of motherhood and fatherhood, all the way back to when they're babies. I mean, that difference is there for that reason. And so I think that there was an ideological decision to sever those things as a culture. And then we were shocked when those got untethered, that we can't figure out what a woman or a man is anymore. That's inevitable because they were designed. Oh, you see that in Genesis 1. God created male and female, and the next thing he they're a family, right? He tells them as a family, as a household, as a unit, to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule. And so that's why we have this distinction.
Yeah, it's hard. In some ways, it's hard for me to wrap my arms around this. A dad of 4 girls, thinking about what am I raising them towards, and a culture of, I feel like my 41 years, like the idea of, well, the sons get to go rule and reign and have like beyond the household type, and the traditional roles of a mom would feel. And I feel like I've felt that before, where it's less like aspired to be, that being a mom is the key role in the family team. As I read it was one of your podcast and Substack blogs about, am I raising daughters to be single and independent versus a wife and mother? As I read it, I'm like, there's wrestling, but at the same time, I feel like now more than ever, I could see, that's amazing. Like that truly, like, I'm like, that's amazing, thinking we got it wrong. Okay. Yes. I see the other side of raising daughters to be wives and mother, but there's still tension there. I know there's a lot of tension. How have you gotten to that point? And how could you help us kind of at least like dip into saying, let's explore this versus just kind of do the norm for what we've done in the past generation?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts because you kind of mentioned, so men have this ability to go and expand. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with saying, why are men doing that? Well, because they're fathers and they're doing it for the family as a member or as a representative of the family team. If that is truly what's happening, then I don't think that there's any tension.
Yeah.
What really creates the tension is when men actually choose to join other teams, they inhabit other identities outside the family because of their own individual desires. They go out there and begin to pursue those things, and they leave their family in the dust. Yeah. But then they turn around and say to the mother, or the culture says to the mother, or the Christian culture, says, hey, yeah, your husband gets to inhabit this other identity, which is being celebrated by the culture. You don't get to do that. And so I think that what the alternative to that is when fathers begin to see everything they're doing in work as really under the umbrella of their identity as father. And so, they're in a dynamic team relationship with their wife. When the husband and wife are one unit, and they're building a family. And so when dad goes off to work, he's going to get resources for the family.
That's right.
He's not there to construct an alternative identity so that he can escape the family. And so as long as that unit is tight, and then you can decide in that family unit, how to deploy the different resources of the family to do the expanding, and I definitely think there are times where the wife is well suited for that role. But I also think that when, you really love motherhood and love raising children, then some of those roles, those traditional distinctive roles, do start to make a lot of sense, especially in certain seasons. But I think there are exceptions. I think that the important thing is that both the husband and wife, but primarily I would see the husband, sees himself as, this is when I get married, I'm no longer just me as an individual. I am a father. And I think that people, and I definitely experienced this when I first became a father, it felt like I was putting on somebody else's clothes. I felt, I wasn't well prepared, culturally speaking, to embrace that. I resisted it all kinds of ways, very subtle and some overt ways. And I think I had to make a faith-based decision that I want to inhabit the role of father. And I will see everything I do in the workplace as an outflow of my role as father, and not as an outflow of an individual identity that I'm trying to construct apart from my family. So it was the battle I had to do in my own mind and my own heart, I think, that really starts to allow mothers and wives to be able to embrace all of the things that God's called them to do. And this I think is a beautiful, sort of design. And I think that part of what our culture is saying is it's ugly. And I think a lot of people are having a subtle aesthetic negative reaction to the idea of family. They hear family like, ooh, I don't like the family. I don't feel like it's something that's beautiful. There's something ugly and there's something destructive about the design of family. And a lot of it is just we haven't seen good ones. And I think it's for good reason that I think a lot of people have this reaction. And so part of what I had to do, and it was really being in Israel and seeing beautiful families. I was shocked when I was in the Middle East. I suddenly encountered so many examples culture-wide. I'd seen some great families growing up in Seattle, but they seemed like the radical exception. But to see a whole culture of flourishing families, just where that was much more normal, it started to allow me to fall in love with the design again. Yeah. And that's when I could embrace my fatherhood, which allowed my wife to fully embrace her motherhood. And now we're off and running. Now we're building a family.
And I mean, as you gave me a tour around your house and the different businesses that you run as a family, and that she's the point on several of those businesses. Yes. It's not like she's cooking and cleaning, and right. It's a brilliant mix of your giftings and this portfolio of businesses. And
yes.
So I want to go back into that in a moment, but the genesis of this concept, Adam and Eve were tasked as man and woman with the challenge. Not Adam was tasked and Eve was on the side, right?
Right.
And then there's a progression. I love that, and I know you've released like the first 2 chapters, and you're working towards. But it's already available, the first 2 chapters, to all of our listeners. Can you talk about that body of work and just like the passion for this multiplying and then ruling?
Yeah. Well, I think what I try to wrestle with when I see a lot of, I experience this and see this especially with young men, a confusion about what they're aiming at in life. Yeah. Like what, and so I think that God settled that for us when He created the first man and woman and said, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and rule." Yeah. In other words, the last part of that is that we are building a ruling household. That's what every single man and woman is really tasked at building. Now, if you're unmarried, I think there's ways in which you are supporting that, or even forming potentially single households with celibate singles. But I think that every one of us really we need to be living and existing and building these households. And this was very well known historically. Like I've spent a lot of time studying the first century, and both the Roman and Jewish household in the first century, it was a huge part of the whole design of all of society. Religion in both the Roman, the Greek, the Jewish world, in both of those kinds of realms was primarily in the home. And their economic engine, the word oikos, the word for household, is where we get the word for economics in English. And so even the idea of the economics was primarily a household, or almost entirely a household-based concept. And so we've decided since the Industrial Revolution to divorce these ideas. And now many of us have grown up and we don't have a memory. Like our parents and grandparents don't remember a time when there was an oikos, when there was a household culture in society. And so I think this has caused great confusion. Yeah. We think it's just about being individuals. And so we don't know why God made male and female. We don't know what a marriage is really designed to do. We don't know what a household or a family is designed to do. We think it's designed to create, sort of a nurturing, temporary environment. And that's why the primary, metaphor we use is the nest. That's a very strange idea if the point is to rule. That's not a great metaphor.
Yeah, the nest, the eagles make it uncomfortable and poke, and then they're forced out of the nest,
that's right?
Yes. And that's what we're doing as families right now.
Yeah.
But you can't rule because then it's never-ending loss of team members. Right.
And the nest isn't designed to be a place from which you rule.
Yeah.
It's and so that's
incubation place.
Yes. That's why the ultimate metaphor really is the monarchy. Yeah. It's really a royal idea. That's why Abraham, when he got married, I think that all of the Hebrew names, this is part of what I'm going to tease out in my book. Yeah. When you read these stories in Hebrew, you're constantly hearing these reinforced ideas in the names of the characters themselves. So Sarah means princess. She was a royal, she was the princess or the queen of this household that Avram, the exalted father, was building. And then he became Abraham, the father of many nations, which was really an outgrowth of his fathering, and that God looked at him and says to him in Genesis 18, I chose you because I knew you would train your household after you in a certain way.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That gets after the difference between the New Testament look at the fatherhood or the family model versus the Old Testament, and maybe some accidental thinking that because New Testament Jesus is out traveling with disciples and sending, hey, we're going to go to different areas to share and spread the gospel, a leave behind mentality versus a build it together. You know this. I'm coming off the road from a let's build it together, live in the RV and travel. So I'm with you on the let's not leave behind the family.
Yes.
But it's painful. It's messy. Why do you think some of us have a fractional? And I've had multiple seasons of my career it's fractional. It's jobs here, and I travel. I do this, I do that. It's all me and all here, and I just try not to hurt my family. Versus the flourishing of it's all interwoven.
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit of the two models of fatherhood?
Yeah. Well, I think that started really because of our shift economically. So the Industrial Revolution essentially said we're going to make factories, and so what we everything is a cog in a machine, not just literally from the perspective of the machines themselves, but that's how we're going to treat individual people. And so everything got built around that, right? Our education system's designed to create people that are obedient cogs in these larger machines. Yeah. And so this is not even debatable. I mean, this is secular sociologists are saying have said all these things. And so this is what we've designed. And I think that what is debatable, or what we are discussing, is what is the cost? Is this a good idea? Do we want to continue down this road? And for those of us who have the scriptures, we have access to the divine blueprint. And so I look at the Industrial Revolution and see the way it atomized people. In other words, took the different parts of the family and said, okay, we don't really want you as a unit. We want to atomize the family. Say there's the father is him and his gifts. The mother is her gifts and daughters and sons. And so everywhere you go, you're being atomized, right? So in sports, we don't compete as families; we compete as individuals. In school, we don't learn as families; we learn as individuals. In churches, we're often atomized into different classes and different life stage groups to do ministry as individuals. And so, and then I think the most destructive was the economic shift, because that's just takes up so much of our time. 40, 50 hours a week where children are going off to school and and husbands and wives are working all as atomized individuals in different places. They're building different things, and so that was a shift. It was a shift for economic reasons, because we discovered that you can create things at scale much better if you atomize the workers in this way. And so people went from, at the turn of the 20th century, from the 19th to 20th century, over 70% of America was living on small farms, and most of the rest of them were in small trades, in cities that were being done in and through the family. And so we went through just an enormous shift economically, and we've never recovered from that. We've never even debriefed what happened. And one of the amazing things is today, because of the internet and because of a lot of other trends, really a lot of the idea that the only way I'm ever going to get a job is if I work for some giant corporation, that is being disrupted radically. And so this is the best time to have this conversation, to say, okay, guys, maybe you were forced, maybe your parents or your grandparents felt very much forced to choose to live these atomized economic lives. You don't have to choose that. There are thousands and thousands of families who, for lifestyle reasons, are making the decision to shift to saying, we're going to take back, as a family team, the economics of our family. And we're going to create in our household an economic engine. And that's really what a household is, I think, from today. We're not really promoting nuclear families. We're not really promoting the family ideal of the 1950s, where the dad goes off to work and comes back and the mom has one or two kids. And, that's not what we're talking about. That's never been the ideal. That was a 15-year period after the World War II. Really, what we're looking back is the last 3, 4, 5,000 years of history, all the way back to how God describes what he designed when he created the first human beings. Like, we want to get back to that design. And so I think one of the elements of that design we have to grapple with is should families begin to pursue economic engines? It doesn't mean it has to be your only source of income. It doesn't mean you can't have a job, but it's really important to begin to consider if God created this team, and you and your wife, you and your husband are designed to work together with your children and generationally, then man, let's experience that. Let's figure out, let's create something that's productive, both spiritually, let's create ministries in and through the household, and then let's create businesses or assets in and through the household.
It's incremental. It's not, you're not telling families quit all your jobs and start plowing the fields. It's really creative, and it's really incremental of all these ideas, of proven ideas. Just as an example, though, because this was fascinating, as you were giving me a tour and we were talking about the real estate piece and the upside downside. And the downside of the real estate, owning rental properties, is exactly the upside of the perfect place to train ourselves and our kids, our families. Would you explain that?
Yeah. So, when you're trying to decide, when you're building assets as a family, you're looking at different asset classes. Should I invest in stocks, or, should we, get involved in sort of partial equity in businesses, or should we get involved in real estate? And when people are looking at these different classes, oftentimes they're being steered towards more passive incomes classes, things like stocks and bonds and paper assets like that. And so if you go that direction, you get that, the advantage of more passivity. And when you go into real estate, the reason why a lot of people don't like real estate, even though it's got so many economic advantages, is really there's just a lot of work that you don't, there's tenants to deal with, there's, renovations to deal with, there's, everyone's worried about the call for, about the plumbing in the middle of the night or whatever. And so there are a certain amount of, realities to that. And there are seasons where, families should not try to take on that kind of responsibility. But I think over time, and we've discovered this with our family, that provides a lot of potential places for us to work together. So in our case, Kelsey's our property manager. She does all the contract work with our tenants, and then our son Jackson does the renovations and the repairs. April, my wife, she does the bookkeeping and the billing. I do the the deal finding and and the purchasing. And so this allows us to have meetings where we're there's a thing called a family office where with some families that have so many resources to steward, They literally like spend all their time, working together and doing investments. And this is sort of like a family office in tiny microcosm. Like, it's a meeting, maybe once a month where we can have these conversations about how do we expand this legacy business. For us, it's called third generation properties. But yeah, we see the downsides of real estate in terms of the kind of active nature of that investment class as being a positive thing because it allows us a platform to do productive work as a family team. We can actually rely on each other's different diverse gifts.
I love it. And to really see dad making a decision in a team context, that real money is that like, and then to actually see how your kids are playing into like their insights, they're hearing from God. They're like, I'm fascinated by continuing to learn with you, and you've already challenged and invited me to like really think about in this next chapter. Well, what does it look like to move into? We have one rental house right now because we live in the RV, but to look into a property being a tool for our family. We skipped over it, but let's go back for a moment to peer-oriented relationships. So part of the economic part you talked about led to an educational system that put all of the same age kids in the same room.
Yes.
And I really haven't thought about the downsides. I mean, there's some that I've thought about, but not the level that you're thinking about and explained in one of your posts. Could you kind of take us into that topic?
Yeah. So this is sort of one of those things that I think would have seemed strange to people historically, but the opposite seems strange to us. In other words, we if you ask most parents, if they freak out if their kids don't have friends or don't have a good relationship with their siblings. In our culture, most of us are like, oh, well, I need to make sure my kids have really good friends. That's an unusual idea. Like as somebody who who's a little bit older, and most of you guys listening to this probably have this experience as well. I still have relationships with siblings and family members. I've not a lot of relationships with my elementary and junior high and high school friends. So I think there's certainly some good things about that. But the assumption that a peer-oriented childhood, in other words, where the main thing that you're worried about in terms of socialization is for your children to be able to handle and interact fluidly with kids basically within about 12 months of their age, that's a very unusual experience. And so it doesn't mean it's bad. There's lots of good things about it. It is great to have friends that you get to spend time with and learn from and learn with. But there's a really dark side to this trajectory that a lot of us need to be aware of. And there's a great book called Hold On to Your Kids. A couple of Canadian secular psychologists wrote this book, and they have a few things that they mention in there that I think are just so clearly true, but are not well known. And so one of the things that they're pointing out is that when you are immersed in a peer-oriented environment like that, it begins to shift the way that you think about yourself, and so they kind of walk through what happens in adolescence, where we expect teenagers to get kind of cold, to all of a sudden their family, to sort of get distant, to be a little bit hidden from their family, and they said if this were to happen with a spouse, if all of a sudden you came home and your spouse was like not really looking you in the eye, like, running in their bedroom, like texting people, not wanting to see like what they're texting, on and on and on, you would look at that and say, oh, they might be cheating on me. Yeah. Right. And basically what these psychologists said is that's exactly what your children are doing. They are cheating on the family, and you are responsible for that. Basically you force them to be in an environment in which they had to choose between survival with their peers and a flourishing relationship in the family. And any child who's immersed, for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week in a peer-oriented environment is going to have to, for survival, the vast majority of them at least, are going to have to choose their peers. And so every time the family wants to create a culture, every time the family wants to call the family together, every time you want to ask your kids to sacrifice for their siblings, all of those things are going to come at a net loss to their identity, to their ability at creating and fighting for the identity that they need to maintain in that peer group. And so basically the psychology, this is very unusual. People, the idea that at 13, 14, 15, kids would be suddenly very cold to their parents, they said that's not psychologically normal. That's not historically normal. And the fact that we all sort of roll our eyes and say, oh, wait till your kids turn into teenagers. It's going to be a nightmare. Good luck. That we have artificially constructed that environment. And it is really destructive to the family. And so we wanted to really think about there are alternative ways to live into that season where that is not the expected outcome.
So and then you play that forward from 15 to 25 and the eye rolls about having to spend Thanksgiving together, right? Like the fractured, feels like there's an abundance side of just throughout the last 80 years, we have the abundance, the ability financially to go buy our own house or apartment or townhouse.
Yeah.
And then now the family moments are you have to get through them versus this is the normal weekly rhythm is we're together and we're going to press through the pain because there's always messiness and pain. But we've almost trained that,
we're so out of practice. Yeah. If once a year you're going to get together with your family and experience the familyness of your family, the fact that that's going to be miserable is not because of family. That's because you did it once a year. Yeah. That's because you're so relationally disconnected. That's because so many of your accounts relationally are overdrawn. Yeah. But if you do this every week, and this is what we experienced in Israel, you see these families that their favorite thing to do is go to their parents' house. It's crazy when you're in Jerusalem and the Sabbath is starting and it's Friday afternoon and you're basically watching everyone, including, couples in their 20s and 30s with their little kids, all go to their parents' houses for the Sabbath. They're not saying, oh my gosh, eye roll, I got to go to my parents. No, they're like, they're very in practice. They love being with their parents. Their parents can't wait to see them and their grandchildren. Yeah. That's normal. That's a normal family culture, but that's because those relationships have been really nurtured by these rhythms, and we don't have those rhythms.
Yep. Like we don't have hundreds and hundreds of times.
That's right. All those reps. Yep. And this is one of the things I tell people. Imagine if you were to create a meal once a week in which your kids bring your grandchildren, like in the future, and they look forward to it, and they are excited, and that's a really meaningful, life-giving time. You will not be able to stop a multi-generational family from emerging from that one rhythm. It's that powerful.